And welcome back to our program. You know, as you get older, you're attending more funerals than you did when you were younger. I never read the obituaries in the newspaper till about 10 years ago. Then I started thumbing through them and catch an occasional name. And then recently, a week does not go by, generally on two or three occasions in the week, where I don't see someone who I've known, often known well. And I'm probably attending at least one funeral a week, sometimes more. Just before this program, I went to a funeral of a wonderful lady that worked with me when I was the Secretary of State of Louisiana, ran my corporations division. And, she was someone I knew well who I didn't really know how well she would do when I put her in the position. I watched her closely and she just blossomed and did an unbelievable job. And so that's one that I attended this week. Gone to three funerals this week. I hope there's not that many next week. And of course, the most ceremonial, high-profile funeral I went to this week was for Corporal Jackson, an African-American police officer who was killed in the line of duty when a shooter from Kansas City came to our community and killed him and now three other officers. One was on life support. They've removed him from the life support. So four officers dead and several others seriously injured. Officer Jackson, Montrell Jackson, Corporal Jackson, was a very special individual. I think I might have told you in discussing it last week that I knew Corporal Jackson. We don't pay police officers enough, not nearly enough. And so for extra duty to take care of his wife and take care of his young son, he would, after working an entire shift, come to work in my subdivision, where we had a fund that paid a police officer to give us additional security, as do many subdivisions throughout this country. Officer Jackson was a regular in our community. He would often be outside my house in my neighborhood, patrolling and keeping an eye on, particularly in the evening. As I drove by, I'd put down the window. We'd visit for a while. I've got an outside refrigerator where I tell the police officers, you're always welcome to come and use the restroom and have some water, whatever you need. And I wanted them visible. I like the fact that they drive right in my driveway. And Officer Jackson was one of those officers who was regularly attending here with us. I say it was most high-profile funeral. It was broadcast nationally as well as on all the stations here in Baton Rouge. And I knew it would be a large turnout of local people, officials, and so many friends who knew this young officer, been on the force for 10 years, an outstanding officer, had a 4-month-old son, but I never dreamed of the attention nationally that would come in. There were literally, I couldn't project 2, 3, 4,000 people who came to his funeral at a church in my hometown of Baton Rouge. But the turnout of police officers from the rest of the country was just unbelievable. And I talked to many of the police officers: San Mateo, California, New Rochelle, New York, many officers from Florida, from Mississippi, from Alabama and Georgia, a wave of officers from Texas. And it was a spectacular sight, despite the fact that we were mourning this officer, to see all these colorful uniforms, because so many police officers wear different colors. And it was just a line of color all around the church. And then after the ceremony was over, there had to be over 1,000 motorcycles that were in triple line that led the procession to take Officer Jackson to his final resting place. So the fire department, 2 large trucks held a huge American flag that draped over the highway, over the interstate. And it was just really a moving sight. The Canadian Mounted Police came down, and the officers, often, a lot of them had bagpipes. They played bagpipes. They came all the way down because they felt they should be here for this fallen officer. And so it was a very impressive ceremony. Lasted 2.5 hours. Our governor down in Louisiana spoke, as did our mayor and a number of officials. But it was more the people who had a relationship with those officers that talked about his life and giving his life for his community. And then his fellow officers saluting as he went by. Very, very emotional. And I know we honor so many of those who pass away in so many ways, not as, I don't want to use the word palatial, but with the massive ceremony brought about in this instance. But it was really something to see. There were a large contingent of officers here from the New York Port Authority. They are police officers, and most of you don't know how widespread the Port Authority is. It oversees the ports of New Jersey and New York City, the biggest ports in terms of volume in the country. But they also oversee areas like the World Trade Center, the airports, JFK and LaGuardia. The airports are run by the New York Port Authority. And I visited with several officers there from the Port Authority. The head of the Port Authority, when 9/11 hit, was a fellow named Neil Levin. I knew Neil well because he was the New York Insurance Commissioner. And we had traveled throughout the world regulating insurance companies outside the United States. Very interesting guy, very bright fellow. And Neil and I hit it off well and had many meals together. And then one day he called me and said, look, I'm going to leave the job. I'm going to take over as the head of the Port Authority. And it was a wonderful opportunity for him. And he asked me to come up and have lunch with him at the Twin Towers, at that nice restaurant the Port Authority had on the 42nd floor of the Twin Towers. I said I would, and I'd planned to do so a few weeks after 9/11. 9/11 hit, and when the first plane went into the North Tower, Neil Levin was having breakfast on his business running the World Trade Center with some people, early morning breakfast. The plane hit, and his body was never recovered. He must have been vaporized, but in the massive heat, but he just wasn't ever found. And so we talked about that. These Port Authority officers talked about that. They brought down big vans of water, and the temperature was 95 degrees. The heat index was well over 100 as all these people came dressed in coats and ties and dresses, and they handed out free water to everyone that walked by. So I had water, we started visiting, and it was just a very moving sight. And I said, why'd you guys come all this distance? They said, well, we want to honor one of yours who fell in the line of duty, but we also know what you did for us. After 9/11, a lot of community leaders from our governor then got together and raised the money for a fire truck. And we sent a fire truck up to New York City loaded with goods and food galore and lots of things that they could use. And they said, you were there for us, and we wanted to be there for you. Quite a moving sight to see these people from all over America and from Canada come here to pay their respects and honor a fallen officer. So I shared that with you. And like I say, I'm sure I'll be going to other funerals as I get older with friends I know. This is certainly the most impressive ceremony I've ever attended, but it's there for all of our loved ones to recognize that we make contributions in many ways, as did this particular officer. So the only other thing to say is, by the way, after the ceremony was over, it was a very long ceremony, a number of us went to a local restaurant. In fact, the restaurants in Baton Rouge, if you went after the funeral, were giving 25% of all their proceeds, of their gross proceeds, to a special fund for the officers killed in the line of duty or injured in the line of duty. And so we went to a local restaurant. The U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy, our U.S. Senator, was there, along with a number of legislators and cross-section of citizens and public officials. We got into discussion about race relations, opening up a dialogue, getting a better handle on our community. And I think the best tribute to Officer Jackson is that he was part of this flow of making it work better, and I think for the good. Be back right after this message.